The airport was busy, but she moved with ease. Every step seemed to carry a rhythm she had perfected over years of constant travel. She was a CEO, a woman who had built her company from the ground up, a person who knew how to handle high-pressure situations with grace and precision. Today she was tired. Meetings had stretched late into the evening, and she looked forward to a flight that would allow her to sit back, relax, and enjoy the quiet of first class. Her suitcase rolled beside her, smooth and steady, carrying both her clothes and the weight of her thoughts. She had so much to process from the past week. Decisions made, partnerships strengthened, a project that was about to launch. She barely noticed the people rushing past her as she approached the gate. She was in her zone, a small bubble of focus amidst the chaos of the airport. When she reached the counter, she smiled politely, handing over her boarding pass and identification. She expected the routine smile, the pleasant words, and then the smooth walk down the jetway. But instead, she met a gate attendant with a neutral face that didn't smile back. The attendant glanced at her boarding pass and then back at her with something unreadable in their eyes. "I'm not sure you can board first class," the attendant said. She froze for a moment. The words didn't make sense. She had bought a first-class ticket, had flown this airline many times, and had never faced this issue. She asked politely why she couldn't board. The attendant didn't give a clear answer. They muttered something about overbooking and asked her to wait for a moment while they spoke to someone else. She waited, standing in her polished shoes, her posture still upright, her face calm but her mind racing. She tried to stay composed to remind herself that confusion and mistakes happen all the time in airports. But deep down, a sense of disbelief and frustration began to grow. She had worked hard for every achievement in her life. She had broken barriers, led with integrity, and earned her place in spaces that were often not welcoming to people like her. And here she was, stopped at a gate as if none of that mattered. People were watching now. Some gave her sympathetic glances. Others whispered quietly to their companions. She could feel their eyes, but she refused to let it shake her. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had always approached challenges with calm and focus. This was no different. She just needed to handle it strategically. The gate attendant returned, their expression still neutral. "I'm sorry, but first class is full. You'll need to wait for the next available seat in business class or economy." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I purchased a first-class ticket. I have flown first class many times, and I have never had this issue. Can you please explain why I am being denied boarding?" The attendant shifted uncomfortably. They mumbled something about the system overbooking first class and claimed there was nothing they could do. She listened carefully, choosing her words with precision. She knew that losing her composure would not help. Anger might feel satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't solve the problem. She needed clarity and resolution. "Could I speak to a gate manager?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. "I would like to understand why I am being treated this way." The attendant sighed and made a call. A few minutes later, a manager appeared, tall and professional, but with a distant look in their eyes. They greeted her without warmth, as if they had dealt with countless complaints and were tired of hearing them. "I see your ticket," the manager said. "I'm afraid first class is full." "There's nothing I can do." She took a moment, steadying herself. She had anticipated this reaction. The manager's role was to enforce policies, but she was not going to be dismissed so easily. "I understand that first class may be full," she said calmly, "but I purchased this ticket and expected to be accommodated as promised. I would like a clear explanation and a solution." The manager shifted uncomfortably. They gave a vague response, citing airline policies and system errors. She listened carefully, taking mental notes. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect and acknowledgement. She had worked hard, earned her place, and deserved to be treated fairly. Other passengers began to notice the interaction. Some whispered among themselves. Others simply watched, intrigued by the calm confidence she displayed. She could feel the eyes on her, but instead of shrinking back, she straightened her posture and spoke even more clearly, making sure every word carried weight. "I am not asking for special treatment," she said. "I am asking for what I have already paid for and what I am entitled to. This is about fairness, and it should matter to everyone here, including your staff." The manager hesitated. It was clear that her words had struck a chord, but they still seemed reluctant to act. She realized that this moment was bigger than her. It wasn't just about a first-class seat. It was about being seen, being respected and challenging assumptions that often went unspoken in spaces like this. She decided to call her assistant. Her fingers moved quickly over her phone as she explained the situation. Within moments, her assistant was contacting the airline's corporate office. She remained at the gate, standing tall, her face calm but her mind alert. She could feel the tension in the air, the subtle unease from the staff and the curiosity from the passengers, but she didn't let it disturb her focus. She had always been someone who turned challenges into opportunities, and this was no different. As she spoke to her assistant, she began to plan her next steps. She would document everything, every exchange, every word, every gesture. This was not just about her own experience, but about ensuring that policies and behavior that disadvantaged people like her would be addressed. She thought about the countless times she had seen others treated unfairly, the small indignities and slights that added up over time. She would not let this go unnoticed. She looked around the gate area, noticing the other passengers. Some were absorbed in their phones, some were talking quietly. None seemed to understand the storm that was brewing, the quiet determination of the woman standing there, refusing to accept an injustice. She felt a mix of resolve and patience. She knew that change often began with a single moment of courage, and she was ready to make this moment count. Minutes passed, and the manager returned, still evasive. She took a deep breath and addressed them directly. "I am asking for clarity and a solution. This is not just about a seat. This is about ensuring that I am treated with the respect and fairness that every passenger deserves. If we cannot resolve this here, I will escalate it to the highest levels of your airline." The manager's expression softened slightly, but they still maintained their stance. She realized that this was not going to be resolved through argument alone. It would require leverage, documentation, and persistence. She nodded to her assistant, who was already in conversation with corporate. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction knowing that action was being taken, that she was not alone in addressing this issue. Throughout it all, she remained composed, aware of the eyes on her, aware of the narrative she was shaping. She wasn't just defending her seat. She was demonstrating how to handle injustice with dignity, how to assert oneself without aggression, and how to turn a personal challenge into a broader lesson. She could feel the subtle shift in the air, the recognition that she was someone who would not be dismissed, someone who had the authority and intellect to demand fairness. As she waited, she thought about the journey ahead, not just the flight, but the steps she would take after this encounter. She would make sure that this incident was not just a story of discomfort, but a catalyst for change. She thought about the power of her voice, the influence of her position, and the responsibility she carried. This was more than a personal inconvenience. It was an opportunity to challenge assumptions, to set a precedent, and to ensure that respect was upheld. The story of this moment, she knew, would ripple outward. It would be a story of resilience, of composure, and of strategic action. It would show that even in spaces where bias or oversight occurred, one person could assert dignity, demand fairness, and catalyze change. She felt a quiet strength, a calm determination that had been honed over years of navigating difficult situations and breaking barriers. Finally, she looked at the gate attendant and the manager, her face serene but firm. "I will wait for corporate to respond. In the meantime, I expect to be treated with professionalism and respect." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. A reminder that she was not just any passenger, but a leader, a woman who had earned her place and would not be overlooked. And so she waited, standing tall, her mind alert, ready for the next step. The tension around her was palpable, but she was unshaken. This was the beginning of a story that would not only change her own experience, but also leave a mark on the airline and everyone who witnessed her courage and composure. The flight had not yet begun, but already a quiet revolution was in motion. The CEO remained at the gate, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke calmly with her assistant. Every word she spoke was measured and precise, as if she was preparing for a boardroom negotiation rather than a confrontation at an airport gate. Her assistant, understanding the urgency, quickly contacted the airline's corporate office. While waiting for a response, she observed the environment around her. People in the queue watched her with curiosity, some whispering quietly. She did not feel embarrassment or intimidation. She felt the clarity of purpose. She knew what she deserved, and she would not let anyone diminish it. Moments later, the gate manager returned, this time flanked by another employee. The CEO greeted them politely, maintaining eye contact. She could sense that her assertiveness was causing the staff to shift in their stance. Still, the manager's tone was defensive, as if prepared for an argument, but she stayed composed. "I understand the first-class cabin is full," she said, speaking calmly. "But I have purchased a ticket and expected to board. This is not just a matter of comfort. It is about fairness and respect," the manager replied, repeating the previous overbooking excuse, but she was ready. She had anticipated resistance, and she remained firm yet polite. "Could you provide documentation that supports this overbooking?" she asked. "Do you have proof that all first-class seats are genuinely unavailable?" The manager hesitated. No, they did not have that readily available. She noted this silently. Every detail mattered. She could see that the manager's confidence was slightly shaken, and the other employee looked uncomfortable. This was the subtle power of composure and knowledge. Passengers continued to watch, some leaning slightly forward as they noticed her calm control of the situation. The CEO did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She understood that the weight of professionalism and reason often outweighed raised voices or displays of anger. Her calm determination sent a silent message. She would not be dismissed, and she would not compromise her dignity. She asked again to speak with someone higher in authority. The assistant's call had already reached a regional manager at corporate who promised to intervene. She explained the situation clearly and without exaggeration, emphasizing her role in the unfair treatment she had received. She requested immediate action, not for herself alone, but for the principle of fair treatment. The corporate staff initially responded with routine politeness, but she insisted they escalate the matter to a decision-maker who could resolve it. While waiting, she reflected on her journey. She thought about the countless times she had faced bias and dismissal, the moments when her expertise and achievements were questioned because of her skin color or gender. She had learned early on to remain composed, to assert herself with intelligence and clarity, and to turn adversity into leverage. She had learned that influence comes not just from position, but from the ability to navigate difficult situations with poise and strategy. The gate manager attempted once more to insist that she could not board first class, but she countered with calm reasoning. "I understand that policies are in place," she said, "but policies are not meant to justify unfair treatment. I have purchased this ticket and met all requirements. I ask that you honor what has already been promised." Her words were simple, yet they carried authority. The manager paused, realizing that her position was being challenged in a way that required thought rather than dismissal. Passengers around her began to notice her demeanor. Some exchanged looks, whispering, while others watched in silence. They sensed a confrontation that was different from typical complaints. She was not angry in a way that demanded attention, but firm in a way that commanded it. She was demonstrating the power of self-respect and clarity of purpose, quietly educating those around her about how to handle injustice with composure. Her assistant updated her that corporate was now fully aware of the situation and had begun contacting airport staff to resolve the issue. She kept the conversation light but pointed, ensuring that her instructions were clear and professional. She made it known that this was not just about securing a seat, but about addressing systemic behavior that affected passengers like herself. The incident was unfolding not merely as a personal grievance, but as a demonstration of advocacy and accountability. Minutes passed slowly. The tension around the gate was noticeable, yet she remained focused. She thought strategically, anticipating every response, considering every option. She could feel the subtle shift in the gate manager's demeanor. They were beginning to recognize that she was serious, not combative, but firm in her insistence on fairness. Her calm approach was slowly breaking down the wall of bureaucratic indifference. She spoke to the other passengers softly, explaining the situation as a matter of principle. Some nodded, others listened quietly, sensing the importance of what was happening. She never raised her voice, never demanded sympathy. She relied entirely on reason, clarity, and the undeniable legitimacy of her claim. This was a lesson in asserting oneself with dignity and tact, a display of influence without aggression. Corporate finally made contact directly with the gate. Speaking to the manager in a firm but professional manner, the CEO was included in the conversation, allowing her to articulate her position clearly. She emphasized that her request was fair, reasonable, and backed by evidence. The purchase of her ticket, her repeated history of first-class travel without incident, and the lack of proof for the overbooking claim. She outlined the need for respect and equal treatment, not just for herself but for all passengers. The manager struggled to respond. Their initial confidence was fading, replaced by unease. They knew that a higher authority was now involved and that this was no longer a simple gate issue. The CEO remained calm, letting the weight of reason and truth carry the interaction. She could feel a subtle respect growing, not from words but from the acknowledgement of her composure and intelligence. During this time, she thought about the broader implications of the situation. It was not just about a seat. It was about recognizing inequities that existed in everyday experiences. She knew that her response could set a precedent, not just for herself but for countless others who had been treated unfairly. She took this responsibility seriously, approaching it as she would any important decision in her professional life, with clarity, strategy, and integrity. The gate staff finally agreed to review the situation further, but she did not stop there. She asked specific questions, requested documentation, and ensured that corporate oversight would remain involved. She was aware of the subtle dynamics at play, the mix of discomfort and acknowledgement from those around her. Her calm authority had shifted the energy in the space. People were watching how someone could navigate bias with intelligence and poise. The CEO remained patient, understanding that resolution required time, strategy, and persistence. She reflected on the importance of teaching others through example. She wanted those around her, both passengers and airline staff, to see the power of measured action, the importance of standing up for oneself with respect, and the influence of reason over emotion. Her presence was not just personal. It was instructive. As the corporate team worked to mediate the situation, she prepared for the next steps. She knew that she would not accept a simple apology or minimal compensation. Her focus was on accountability and change, not just immediate comfort. She wanted to ensure that future passengers, particularly those who faced systemic bias, would encounter a fairer, more respectful process. Through it all, she maintained a demeanor of calm focus. She smiled occasionally, made polite conversation with her assistant, and addressed each staff member with professionalism. Yet underneath this composed exterior there was a quiet determination. She was not merely resolving a personal inconvenience. She was orchestrating a process that would hold others accountable, demand fairness, and leave a lasting impact on the airline's practices. Finally, she sensed that progress was being made. The corporate team had taken control, and the manager at the gate was clearly under instruction. She stood tall, quietly observing the shift in behavior around her. Her patience, clarity, and persistence were paying off. She had transformed an unfair denial into a structured process that could lead to resolution, not only for herself but for others in the future. She realized that this moment, while exhausting, was significant. It was a display of courage, strategy, and dignity, a model for how to handle situations where authority and bias collide. Even as the airline worked to correct the mistake, she remained aware of her power to influence outcomes through calm, strategic action. She knew that this was the first real step in a longer process that could result in systemic change. And as she stood there, composed and dignified, she felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had turned a personal affront into an opportunity to demand respect, fairness, and accountability. She was no longer just a passenger. She was a leader showing in real time how to navigate injustice with poise and impact. She stood at the gate, her mind focused on the next step. The corporate team was now fully involved, and she had the advantage of having her assistant coordinating behind the scenes. Even though she had not yet achieved resolution, she felt a quiet sense of control. She understood that patience, strategy, and calm persistence were her strongest allies in this moment. Every interaction mattered, and she intended to ensure that every word she spoke carried purpose and clarity. While she waited, she observed the passengers around her. Some were still whispering, some watched silently, curious about the unfolding situation. She did not let their stares unsettle her. She had long ago learned how to remain composed under scrutiny. In fact, their attention only reinforced the importance of how she carried herself. Her posture, her calm voice, and her unwavering confidence conveyed strength without aggression. She knew that how she presented herself could influence outcomes just as much as the arguments she made. Finally, her assistant updated her. The corporate office had made contact with the gate, and a senior customer service manager was on the line. She took a deep breath and accepted the call, speaking directly and clearly. She described everything that had happened at the gate, from the initial denial to the repeated explanations about overbooking that lacked proof. Her voice was calm but firm, conveying both the injustice she had experienced and the expectation of action. She emphasized that this was not just about herself. It was about fairness, accountability, and ensuring that policies were applied equitably. The corporate representative listened, occasionally interjecting with questions for clarity. She answered each one carefully, making sure that the narrative was factual and compelling. She did not exaggerate or show unnecessary emotion. Instead, she relied on logic, documentation, and the undeniable fact that she had purchased the first-class ticket and met every requirement. She could feel the balance of power shifting subtly in her favor. After several minutes of discussion, the corporate representative acknowledged the situation and promised immediate action. They were going to instruct the gate manager to honor her first-class ticket and to ensure that she was treated respectfully. While this was a relief, she remained aware that true resolution required more than immediate accommodation. She wanted accountability, and she wanted to ensure that this incident would not happen again, either to herself or to others. She ended the call with a quiet sense of satisfaction, but did not relax completely. She returned to observing the gate area, noting the subtle changes in staff demeanor. The gate manager now approached her with a different attitude, their posture less defensive, their tone more conciliatory. They apologized politely for the confusion and assured her that her boarding would be facilitated without further issues. She listened, nodding, but did not accept this as a final resolution. She knew that the apology alone was not sufficient. She intended to hold the airline accountable to higher standards. The boarding process was initiated, and she prepared to move toward the jetway. As she walked, she maintained her calm composure, acknowledging passengers and staff with a polite nod and a brief smile. She understood the symbolic importance of her actions. Every step she took demonstrated dignity, professionalism, and the quiet assertion of rights. It was a lesson not just for the airline staff, but for everyone witnessing the situation. She showed that one could address unfair treatment without anger, confrontation, or disrespect, relying instead on composure, intelligence, and strategy. Once on board, she took her seat in first class, but she did not simply settle in. She reflected on the sequence of events, considering the broader implications. This was more than a personal victory. It was an opportunity to influence change within the airline system. She intended to follow up, to speak with higher executives, and to advocate for training and policy improvements. She recognized that her position and visibility gave her the ability to create meaningful change. She was determined to use it wisely. As the plane began taxiing, she reviewed her notes from the incident. She had recorded every detail: times, conversations, names, and reactions. She thought about how she would structure her follow-up communications to ensure that the airline would implement substantive measures. Her goal was not revenge or personal gain, but fairness and respect for all passengers. She believed that leadership in moments like these was about integrity and responsibility, not power or retribution. The flight took off smoothly, and she allowed herself a moment to breathe. Yet even in that moment of relief, she remained thoughtful and strategic. She knew that the story of this encounter could have far-reaching effects, especially if it was handled correctly. She wanted to turn a personal inconvenience into a lesson in advocacy, fairness, and dignity. She considered how she could share her experience in a way that would inspire others to assert their rights respectfully and effectively. She began drafting a plan for her follow-up. She would request a meeting with airline executives not to demand compensation, but to discuss training, policies, and ways to prevent similar situations. She would emphasize accountability and systemic improvement. She believed that change could be achieved not through confrontation alone, but through strategic communication, documentation, and the leverage of her experience and position. She wanted to ensure that other passengers, particularly those who had faced discrimination or bias, would benefit from her advocacy. Throughout the flight, she remained composed, attentive, and reflective. She observed the cabin, noting interactions between passengers and staff, thinking about the broader lessons of human behavior, respect, and fairness. She considered how people respond to authority, to reason, and to calm assertiveness. She knew that her own behavior had a ripple effect, influencing not just the immediate situation, but the perceptions and actions of those around her. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, she had a clear plan. She would follow up with a detailed report to the airline, documenting every aspect of the incident, highlighting the gaps in policy and practice, and recommending actionable solutions. She would request accountability and transparency, ensuring that the airline addressed the systemic issues that allowed such an incident to occur. Her approach was firm but constructive, aiming to create lasting change rather than merely seeking personal vindication. As she looked out of the window at the clouds below, she reflected on her own journey. She had faced countless obstacles in her career, overcoming bias, skepticism, and resistance. She understood the importance of perseverance, strategy, and composure. She knew that standing up for oneself in moments of injustice was not always easy, but it was essential. Every challenge was an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, integrity, and influence. She also considered the emotional aspects of the incident. While she had remained calm, she acknowledged the subtle frustration and indignation she had felt. She recognized the importance of channeling those emotions constructively, using them to fuel strategic action, rather than allowing them to disrupt focus. She believed that emotional intelligence was a key component of effective leadership, especially in moments of conflict or bias. As the hours passed, she continued to plan her next steps. She would ensure that the airline implemented training programs, revised policies, and improved oversight to prevent similar incidents. She would communicate clearly and professionally, using her position and experience to advocate for fairness and respect. She understood that this was an opportunity to create positive change, not just for herself, but for countless others who might face similar challenges in the future. She also reflected on the power of composure and clarity in difficult situations. By remaining calm and strategic, she had shifted the balance of power, influencing the airline staff and corporate representatives without aggression or confrontation. She had demonstrated that true influence comes from integrity, intelligence, and assertiveness, not from anger or intimidation. Her actions had already begun to set a precedent, showing others how to handle similar situations with dignity and effectiveness. By the time the flight began its descent, she felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The immediate issue of boarding had been resolved, and she had laid the groundwork for systemic change within the airline. She had turned a personal affront into an opportunity for advocacy, accountability, and improvement. She had demonstrated the power of strategic action, composure, and clarity in the face of injustice. She prepared for landing with a sense of purpose. She knew that the next steps would involve follow-up communications, meetings with airline executives, and continued advocacy. She was ready to take on these tasks with the same calm, focused, and strategic approach that had carried her through the incident at the gate. She had transformed a moment of challenge into a moment of leadership and influence, and she was determined to see it through to meaningful change. As the plane touched down smoothly, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had navigated the situation with dignity, intelligence, and strategic insight. She had turned a moment of personal discomfort into an opportunity for broader impact. She knew that her actions would not only address her own experience, but also create a precedent for fairness, respect, and accountability within the airline industry. She stepped off the plane with confidence, ready to continue her advocacy and ensure that this incident would lead to real, lasting change. After landing, she made her way through the airport with calm precision. She had managed the immediate issue of boarding, but she knew this was only the beginning. The experience had highlighted a problem that went beyond one flight or one gate attendant. There were systemic issues at play, and she intended to address them thoughtfully and strategically. As a CEO, she understood the power of influence, and she was determined to use it to create meaningful change. She returned home and immediately began drafting a clear, concise report to the airline. She included every detail from the incident, the initial denial, the responses from staff, the lack of documentation for overbooking, and the eventual corporate intervention. Her writing was precise and professional, focused not on emotion but on facts and outcomes. She wanted the airline executives to understand the seriousness of the situation and the importance of addressing the underlying issues. The next day, she received a call from the airline's senior executives. They offered an apology for the incident and assured her that corrective action would be taken. They proposed additional compensation, including a voucher for future travel and priority services. While she appreciated the gesture, she was not satisfied with a temporary resolution. She wanted systemic change that would prevent this from happening to anyone else. She politely declined the immediate compensation and asked to schedule a meeting to discuss policy improvements and staff training. During the meeting, she spoke with clarity and authority. She described the situation at the gate, emphasizing that the denial of service was not only unfair, but also reflected deeper issues within the airline's culture and training. She pointed out that policies could be enforced respectfully and fairly, but only if staff were trained to handle situations with awareness and sensitivity. She suggested implementing workshops on customer service, inclusivity, and bias recognition to ensure that all passengers, regardless of race or background, were treated with dignity and respect. The executives listened attentively, taking notes and asking questions for clarification. They were clearly surprised by the depth of her analysis and the strategic approach she was taking. She did not present herself as a complainant. She presented herself as a problem solver, someone invested in creating solutions that would benefit the organization as a whole. Her demeanor, composed yet assertive, commanded respect and attention. By the end of the meeting, the executives had committed to a plan for training and policy improvements. Recognizing the value of her perspective and experience, she followed up by submitting a detailed written proposal. It outlined specific steps for training, accountability measures, and ways to monitor staff behavior to prevent discrimination or unfair treatment. She recommended periodic reviews, anonymous feedback channels, and clear escalation procedures for passengers who felt they had been treated unfairly. She emphasized that these measures were not about punishing staff, but about fostering a culture of respect and professionalism. Her recommendations were practical, actionable, and rooted in experience. Over the next few weeks, she maintained communication with the airline to ensure that progress was being made. She received updates about the implementation of new training modules, revised boarding policies, and improved customer service protocols. She also noticed subtle changes when traveling with the airline again. Staff were more attentive, communication was clearer, and the overall experience reflected a higher standard of care. She recognized that her persistence and strategic approach had driven these improvements, and she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction in knowing that her actions were having a real impact. She also reflected on the broader lessons of the experience. It was not just about airline policy. It was about how to respond to unfair treatment with composure, intelligence, and strategy. She had demonstrated that one could assert oneself firmly and respectfully, using facts and reason rather than anger or confrontation. She had shown that influence comes from clarity, preparation, and persistence, and that systemic change is possible when one approaches challenges thoughtfully. In conversations with friends and colleagues, she shared her experience not to boast but to illustrate the importance of standing up for oneself while maintaining professionalism. She emphasized that moments of injustice could be opportunities to create positive change if handled strategically. She wanted others to see that advocating for fairness was not only possible, but also impactful when approached with dignity and intelligence. The media eventually caught wind of her story, highlighting her leadership and strategic approach to resolving the incident. She was careful in her interviews, focusing on the lessons learned and the changes that had been implemented, rather than dwelling on the initial injustice. She emphasized the importance of systemic improvement, the value of training and awareness, and the power of calm, measured advocacy. Her story inspired others, showing that even individuals facing bias or unfair treatment could create meaningful change through strategy, composure, and persistence. As the airline implemented the training and policy changes she recommended, she continued to monitor the progress. She received reports on staff participation, feedback from passengers, and improvements in customer service metrics. She remained engaged, not as an adversary but as a partner invested in ensuring that the changes were effective and enduring. Her approach was collaborative, professional, and focused on creating sustainable improvements. Through it all, she maintained her usual busy schedule, balancing the responsibilities of running a company with her commitment to advocacy. She demonstrated that leadership extended beyond one's own organization. It included the responsibility to use one's experience and influence to create fairness and opportunity for others. Her actions reflected a broader vision of leadership, one that combined personal integrity, strategic thinking, and a commitment to systemic improvement. The experience also strengthened her own sense of confidence and resilience. She realized that facing unfair treatment with composure and strategic action could turn a moment of challenge into an opportunity for impact. She had navigated bureaucracy, addressed bias, and created change without resorting to aggression or conflict. Her approach was a model of leadership in practice, showing that influence is built through preparation, clarity, and persistence. In reflecting on the incident, she recognized the importance of documenting experiences, advocating for accountability, and approaching challenges with a long-term perspective. She understood that immediate resolution was only part of the solution. Lasting change required careful planning, strategic action, and ongoing engagement. She took pride in knowing that her approach had led to tangible improvements, benefiting not only herself but countless others who might encounter similar situations in the future. Her story continued to resonate with others in her professional network and the broader community. People admired her ability to turn an uncomfortable and potentially humiliating situation into an opportunity for leadership and impact. She became an example of how to navigate unfair treatment with dignity, intelligence, and strategy, inspiring others to advocate for themselves and for systemic improvement. Ultimately, the incident at the airline became a defining moment, not because of the denial itself, but because of how she responded. Her calm, professional, and strategic actions transformed a personal challenge into an opportunity for advocacy and systemic change. The airline had implemented meaningful improvements, staff had received training, and passengers could expect a fairer and more respectful experience. Her actions demonstrated the power of composure, intelligence, and persistence in creating change, leaving a lasting impact on both the airline and the broader community. The CEO reflected on the entire experience as she prepared for her next business trip. The incident at the airline had tested her patience, her composure, and her strategic thinking. It had also reinforced her belief in the power of calm, intelligent action in the face of unfair treatment. She had learned once again that leadership was not only about running a company, but also about advocating for fairness, equity, and respect in all spaces. She thought about the first moments at the gate, the denial of boarding and the subtle discomfort in the air. She remembered how the gate staff had avoided eye contact, how other passengers had watched quietly, and how the situation could have escalated if she had responded with anger or frustration. Instead, she had relied on strategy, composure, and persistence to navigate the challenge. She realized that this approach had made all the difference, transforming a potentially humiliating moment into a catalyst for meaningful change. In the days that followed, the airline had implemented many of the changes she had recommended. Staff training programs focused on bias awareness, inclusivity, and professional customer service had begun. Policies had been clarified and communicated to ensure that first-class passengers received the service they had paid for, and escalation procedures had been strengthened. The airline executives had expressed their appreciation for her guidance and had acknowledged that her involvement had led to improvements that would benefit countless passengers in the future. She found satisfaction in the impact of her actions but also recognized the deeper lessons. The experience reinforced the importance of documenting incidents, communicating clearly, and approaching challenges strategically. She had shown that assertiveness could coexist with professionalism, and that advocacy could be both effective and constructive. She understood that creating change often required patience, persistence, and a focus on solutions rather than conflict. Her story began to circulate among her professional network. Colleagues, friends, and industry peers admired her ability to handle the situation with intelligence and grace. Many reached out to discuss similar experiences they had faced, seeking guidance on how to respond effectively. She took the opportunity to mentor others, emphasizing the importance of staying calm, gathering facts, and advocating for fairness in a professional and strategic manner. She wanted her experience to serve as a guide for others navigating bias or unfair treatment in their own lives. She also considered the broader impact of her actions on the airline industry. By holding the company accountable and providing clear recommendations for improvement, she had helped to create standards that would influence how staff interacted with passengers across the organization. She had transformed a personal challenge into an opportunity to foster systemic change, demonstrating that leadership extended beyond one's immediate responsibilities. Her approach had set a precedent, showing that individual action could lead to meaningful improvements in institutional practices. As she traveled for business over the following months, she noticed subtle improvements in her experiences with the airline. Staff were more attentive, communication was clearer, and the overall environment felt more respectful. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her actions had contributed to these changes. She had not only resolved her own situation, but had helped to improve the experience for countless other passengers, particularly those who might face bias or unfair treatment. Throughout the process, she maintained her usual balance of work and personal life. She continued to lead her company with the same dedication, but she also recognized the importance of using her influence to address broader issues. She understood that leadership was about more than profit or productivity. It was about creating environments where fairness, respect, and integrity were upheld. Her actions with the airline reflected this philosophy, demonstrating the impact one individual could have when they approach challenges strategically and with integrity. She shared her experience in professional forums, speaking about the importance of advocating for oneself while maintaining composure. She highlighted the lessons she had learned, the power of clear communication, the importance of documentation, and the effectiveness of strategic persistence. She encouraged others to approach similar challenges with calm intelligence, emphasizing that real influence comes from thoughtful action rather than confrontation. The CEO also reflected on the personal growth that had come from the experience. She had strengthened her confidence in navigating difficult situations, reinforced her belief in the importance of integrity, and developed new strategies for influencing systemic change. She recognized that moments of unfair treatment, while challenging, could be transformed into opportunities for leadership and impact. She felt empowered, knowing that her response had made a tangible difference. Over time, the story of her experience became a reference point for discussions about fairness and accountability within the airline. Staff training materials included examples of how to handle difficult situations professionally, and executives used her recommendations to refine policies and procedures. Her advocacy had created a ripple effect, improving the experience of passengers and fostering a culture of respect within the organization. The incident, once a source of frustration, had become a catalyst for positive change. She continued to travel extensively, and while minor challenges occasionally arose, she approached them with the same calm and strategic mindset. She had learned to navigate complex situations with patience, clarity, and persistence. The experience with the airline had reinforced her belief in the power of measured action and professional advocacy. She knew that change was possible when approached thoughtfully and strategically, and she applied these lessons in all aspects of her personal and professional life. The CEO also reflected on the broader societal implications of her experience. She recognized that bias and unfair treatment were not isolated incidents but part of larger patterns that affected many individuals. By addressing her own situation with composure and strategic action, she had contributed to creating awareness and promoting accountability. Her actions had demonstrated that individuals could challenge systemic issues effectively, using influence, intelligence, and integrity to foster meaningful change. As she looked back on the entire experience, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. She had navigated an unfair situation with grace, advocated for systemic improvements, and inspired others through her actions. She had turned a personal challenge into an opportunity for leadership, education, and advocacy. Her story served as a reminder that calm, thoughtful, and strategic action could transform moments of injustice into opportunities for impact. Ultimately, the experience with the airline became a defining moment in her life. It was a story of resilience, leadership, and the power of strategic advocacy. She had shown that one person could make a difference, not by confrontation or anger, but through composure, clarity, and persistence. Her actions left a lasting impact on the airline, its staff, and the passengers who would benefit from improved policies and training. As she continued her work and travel, she carried the lessons of this experience with her. She remained committed to fairness, integrity, and strategic action, using her influence to create positive change whenever possible. The incident had been challenging, but it had also been transformative, reinforcing her belief in the power of calm, thoughtful, and persistent advocacy. She had turned a moment of unfair treatment into an enduring legacy of leadership and impact.